Okay, it looks like all of the attendees are starting to enter the webinar. So we'll go ahead and just get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in today's webinar, Getting Back to Business, Building Your Net to Minimize Your Risk. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to be here with us for this panel discussion, and to our panelists for sharing such valuable information with our members and guests. My name is Stella Primo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Capital Region Family Business Center. The Family Business Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started over a decade ago by family businesses interested in sharing resources and best practices on family business succession. Our mission is to help family businesses in our region to grow and prosper. So if you're not a member yet, please consider joining our outstanding network. The webinar is going to be recorded and included on our website at capfamilybus.org, and I'll be sending out an email this afternoon with more information. The Q&A section below is what we'll be using to answer follow-up questions after the panelists have shared their information. This presentation is for educational purposes only and not intended to be advice. Please connect with your personal advisors for specific questions regarding your situation. Kim, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stella. You know, when the Family Business Center Programs Committee was brainstorming about what our members and fellow businesses would want to hear next in the COVID chapter, we quickly landed on the challenges of getting back to business. And so after that long slog through the spring, I suspect we are all ready for a new normal. So my committee partner, Lois Lang, and I have pulled in a few favors to get this impressive panel of experts. And so today we have business leaders right off the front lines of the COVID business battlefield, and a safety and legal expert to guide us through some of the most often asked questions as we're all getting back to business. I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves as I call them up, but we'll save time for questions at the end, and certainly encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box down below. We have about 150 very busy people on the line, so let's begin with my friend and longtime client, Katina Rapton. She is the general manager of Mel Rapton Honda in Sacramento. Katina, many of our Zoomers have watched you literally grow up over the airwaves, but there might be some out there who aren't in Northern California who don't know your business. So will you just give us a quick overview of the dealership and how your business has been impacted by the shelter-in-place orders?
Certainly. My business is 58, almost 59 years old, started by my dad. My brother and I are now current owners of the business. We have 3 facilities. One is a main dealership that it provides all aspects of an automotive dealership. And we have a body shop, and then a certified body shop and service center in our downtown area. Well, the impact obviously has been great. A lot of confusion at first. The good news is we have a great organization, California Motor Car Dealer Association, that has given us daily updates and the best advice that we could get. Unfortunately, things as easy as a comma has thrown confusion into our world. The automotive industry was deemed an essential business right from the get-go. So we didn't have any time to ramp up or anything. We had to start from the beginning and figure out what to do. So it was somewhere in the neighborhood of March 16th, 17th, somewhere in there, when we started our furloughs and layoffs and meetings, trying to figure out how to move forward safely, and not knowing what was going to be the impact in regard to the amount of customers that would want us to continue to do business.
So how many employees have been laid off, and then how many are back now? You took quite a hit.
We did. We were just shy of 200 employees total. We laid off 21 right from the beginning, basically terminated right from the beginning, 21. Furloughed 83, we brought back 26. So we still have 60-ish in limbo that we're still deciding how we're going to bring them back, when we need to bring them back, and even in some cases, if we're going to bring them back.
And how's business?
It's coming back. I mean, at first it was horrible. I mean, an average day in the service department's about 150 to 170 customers a day in the service department. And at the beginning it was 30. We typically have 9 service advisors, the people that come in and write, your service order up. We got down to 2. Now we're at 4. Sales, we're usually right at 200 a month, which would, give you 50 a week or so. And we were at 20. Now we sold 198 last month with a
good.
significantly shortened staff. So in a different process, interestingly enough, a much more refined process. And our customer satisfaction, which is typically in the 89 to 97% in both areas, is now at nearly 100%. So every customer we're dealing with is satisfied. So that's even, it's frosting on the cake for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So now as you're bringing people back, can you talk about how you have or how you are determining what positions to bring back and when, how you've staged that?
Well, in a car dealership, every department is like a separate business. It has its own expense structure and income structure. And so we take each one of our department heads and determine what level of expertise we need. So like as a technician, if we have our only highly paid technicians and we have, $19.99 oil change, I'm going to lose money. So I have to balance the people that I have that are highly trained and specialized and balance that. With my salespeople, I figure how many people I can, it's a lot harder because I don't know who's going to walk in the front door. We're still trying to do appointment only basis. So it really is balancing the cost of labor versus the kind of business that we're trying to perform and needing to perform.
So as employees have come back, tell me about how you've communicated or reset the expectations in terms of their work schedules, what they're wearing, social distancing. I mean, how are you setting up the work environment?
Schedules have been very, very difficult, in particular for our service staff. They worked 4 10-hour shifts, and now they were working 5 days a week. 4 days at first, then 5 days. And so it was been extremely difficult on their families that were used to having their family member home for 4 and 5 days at a time. But they're happy with the type of work they're getting. And so it's a little bit easier for them as things have moved forward. Their schedule will go back. Each one of them meets with me or a department head to go over our criteria of wearing a mask if you're within 6 feet of another employee, wearing a mask 100% of the time if you're in front of a customer. Obviously, hygiene, washing hands, hand sanitizing, gloves, those types of things. It's been tough with some people. I have a faction of employees that think they all got COVID back in January, that think they're exempt from wearing masks because they can't get it. And we have to do a little bit of education there. And it's been tough with some people. I've had to send at least one employee home to sort of get some people's attention. And that worked. But it just can't, it's a tough thing to mandate. Thank goodness I'm not in an environment where I have to mandate it to my customers. We suggest it. We ask that they wear masks, but don't require it. But it's gotten to where no matter what you do, it's wrong. I had a customer complain yesterday that none of my customers had on masks. And today, everybody I'm looking at has on masks. So, it's hard to figure out where to draw that line.
So have you set up the work environment differently? I mean, you've got showroom, you've got work bays, you've got service counter, you've got offices upstairs. Physically, what have you done?
Plexiglass has been our friend. We have plexiglass stanchions in front of anywhere where there is a customer greeting one of our employees. Because of the lessened staff, we have been able to spread people out. I'm a little bit concerned with how that's going to happen when we bring everybody back. Up in the office, there's typical cubicles that give some protection. But anywhere where there's a customer or an employee that is a face-to-face, there's plexiglass now. Sales has been stretched out. Everybody has their own station where that wasn't the case before. They had to
Okay.
share workspace.
So, so you mentioned you have some standards for employees, not as many standards for customers. Have you had to literally throw out any violators on either side yet?
Not for not complying. We've had a few people feel that our big gallon of sanitizer was theirs and they could take it home. So I had some issues there that I had to address. Gloves are another one. They tend to want to take handfuls of gloves. So, you know, it's uncomfortable to say, can you please put the 20 gloves back? But it's, I mean, it's like, and I had to tell the man yesterday, well, the only reason you're yelling at me is because you know you're wrong. But you can have a pair, they're there for customers, right? I mean, but they're not there to take home for your family. So those kinds of problems I've had a few people, and interestingly enough, probably my biggest complainers are nurses, it seems. They feel that the waiting to wipe down the counters at the cashiers was excessive. My people wearing masks were excessive. And the 3 complaints that I got out in service were all from the healthcare field. So and I said, you know, I'm just following the CDC guidelines the best I can. And, you know, one of my people gets sick and it can close me down. So I'm doing my best to keep, you know, them safe as well as our customers. And, you know, only one person said, I'm not coming back because I took too long to wipe down a desk. It's silly.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
now, I mean, you've been ramping up for the last 3 weeks now. So are there any 1 or 2 lessons you've learned in this process if we have to go through this again in the winter, things that you do differently the next time?
Well, you know, we jumped on this pretty quick. So if anybody hasn't jumped on it quickly, I would recommend addressing it as quickly as possible and then really evaluating. Every week I send out an email to my employees telling them where we're at, reminding them what our requirements are. Obviously from a liability standpoint, I want to make sure they know their rights as far as if they're not comfortable coming into work. But I think acting fast, and when you expect the worst, expect it to get even worse, because it does. You know, we learned that we didn't have anywhere near as much cross training as we would have hoped was there. We, because certain support staff were gone, I saw some glaring deficiencies within some of my managers that relied too heavily on their support staff. And so, you know, once you see that, you adjust and address it, and that's been done here. And it's some hurt feelings at first, but they've come around and realized that they could have been doing a better job all along. So that's been somewhat helpful for us.
All right, those are some hurtful lessons, but
Yeah.
but obviously a good way to at least have some transparency. And Katina, as always, I appreciate your transparency and your willingness to share. Not very many business owners would be willing to share the numbers and some of the scars and bruises you have, but I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let's
Ken.
move over to who's in my bottom left corner, who knows where he is in your corner, but Anthony Poston. Anthony is the CEO of ESM Insight. Now, ESM used to stand for Executive Safety Management, but I don't know what it stands for now. Anthony is, and his company, they are our go-to safety experts. We do not use anybody else, and I love the work they do. Anthony, will you just tell our attendees a little bit about ESM and your primary service offerings to employers?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, everybody, for having me on. And Katina, that was very insightful. I really applaud all the things that you're doing. A lot of employers are trying to figure out what to do, what are recommendations, what are requirements, and you're doing an excellent job. So good job. Congratulations. We are a tech-enabled workers' compensation risk management company. We really focus on safety, compliance, risk management as a preventative measure to reduce and mitigate injuries. If an injury happens, we have workers' compensation claims advocates or claims managers that help interface on behalf of employers with the carriers, help to develop claims management strategies, return to work strategies, and ultimately put together a comprehensive risk management program that helps minimize the cost and impact of workers' compensation, whether it's reducing your XMOD, controlling your XMOD, competing in an industry like construction where you have to have an XMOD at a certain percentage. So we help employers kind of navigate this really tumultuous workers' comp system. And now fast forward to COVID-19, this whole new requirement from infectious disease and preparedness. And really, when we started to track this in February, we had put together various tools and programs to manage this type of exposure. But then as this exposure evolved, as we got smarter about it, as we got more data about it, and the requirements started to become more clear, we've evolved our infectious disease plan to really adhere to the COVID-19 mitigation requirements. So it's been an evolution, it's been a journey. Glad to share some insights that we've learned through this process, do what we can to help employers get back to business.
So I know, I mean, you work with a myriad of different companies and industries all over creation. So can you just kind of share with us the kind of recurring questions? You don't have to give us the answers right now, but the questions you just hear every day. You told me that you've been on the phone all morning long.
Yeah.
What are they asking you as they gear up to bring employees and customers back on site?
I think it's exactly what I just mentioned to Katina, which is what are the recommendations versus what are the requirements? There's just so much noise out there. How do I filter what I actually need to do to bring my employees back from a compliance standpoint, let alone the psychological hurdles that we're going to have to overcome to bring employees back into a work environment, leaving the safety of their own homes. So what we're trying to help employers do is really focus on there's 5 aspects that employers need to do from the state level, which is do a complete risk assessment and a site-specific plan, train your employees on COVID-19 screening, implement specific control measures and screenings, kind of like Katina mentioned, the plexiglass. I think that's a great example of some engineering controls that employers can take. What are our disinfecting protocols? And then also how we're going to implement social distancing guidelines. And really 3 key aspects that we help employers focus on is exactly that. What are our PPE requirements? What are social distancing requirements? What are our disinfecting procedures? And if you can develop a strategy on those 3 components, you're in compliance, but then you're also helping to hashtag flatten the curve.
So these rules, regs, seem to be changing, I would say daily, at least weekly. So what's the current status of workplace absolute requirements that I have to have in order to bring my staff back?
So OSHA's got 7 requirements for reentry or return to work. And I'm just going to read them here. 1, have an infectious disease and preparedness plan. 2, have infection prevention measures. 3, procedures for prompt identification and isolation of sick people. 4, communicate about workplace flexibilities. 5, workplace controls. 6, my favorite, follow OSHA standards, which is so nebulous. And then 6, classify worker exposures to COVID-19 risk categories. And that last one, we've really helped employers to focus on. OSHA has created a risk pyramid. It starts at very high, high, medium, and low. And they expect employers, or they require employers to identify which departments fall into which one of those categories. And so take that further, what are the affected risks that those employees in those categories are going to come into contact with? And then what are the PPE requirements? So for example, a very high might be a nurse working on the front lines, treating COVID-19 patients, very high risk. A low might be an office employee who's part-time working at home, part-time working at the office. So the risks are much smaller, and therefore the PPE requirements might be a little bit more loose or flexible.
So ESM Insight had, or probably still does, on your website as of last week, a strategy for getting people back and basically the reentry program. Is that available to the public?
Yes. So again, we've kind of been tracking this all along, starting with March. We had the infectious disease and preparedness plan, which really focused more on bloodborne pathogen and aerosol transmissible diseases. That was really what OSHA required from an infectious disease plan. Then we went shelter in place. So we put together a whole remote work program. Now our work sites have extended from just our facilities to our home environments. And so we have to manage the potential repetitive motion exposures of those employees now working at a desk, for example, at home. Many of them were working at their tables, dining room tables or kitchen tables, and we were hearing back pains and shoulder pains because they didn't have the right ergonomic equipment like they did at the office. Then the third phase was, I have these injured employees and I've been providing modified duty, but now everybody's sheltering in place. How do I manage those work restrictions? How do I manage that modified duty? Because I don't want to pay temporary disability payments that are impacting my ex-mod and workers' comp premiums. And then we got into the phase 4 aspect, which was pretty much now. We entered stage 2 May 8th, which California has 4 stages. Phase 2 is the whole reentry process from retail to manufacturing, lower risk. Now we're seeing kind of stage 2.5 to 3, where hair salons are opening, dining or restaurants are opening more, obviously with mitigation practices. I think we're far away from the stage 4, but we're all ready to get back to work. And so all along this pandemic journey, we've been trying to provide tools and free resources for employers to manage this impact. So all of that is on our site. If you go to our site, you'll see a little pop-up that says Compliance Center. All of the tools are in Word or PowerPoint or Excel, so you can download them, edit them, put your logo on them. And then obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're here to play our part and provide support when we can.
Yeah, you all have been really generous in offering free resources, and I personally, for my company, have benefited from those. So thank you for sharing them with the rest of the world. So I think we all have probably heard that Governor Newsom issued the executive order stating that any COVID-19 related illness of an employee is presumed to arise out of their employment and is subject to workers' compensation coverage. That's a rebuttable presumption, but at first blush, it is the employer's on the employer's buck. So can you talk, Anthony, about how employers can minimize that risk as they bring people back so that they don't end up with, a workers' comp COVID claim?
Yeah, the whole premise of safety is about prevention. So much to what Katina has been doing is really having a proactive COVID-19 mitigation strategy, from disinfection, PPE. If you have PPE, that was a big issue. In April, we couldn't even find appropriate PPE or enough PPE, but now that's starting to loosen as well. Same with toilet paper. So some random things that we've run into during this time. So really having a good strategy, your exposure control plan strategy, from PPE to disinfection to social distancing to how you're going to reduce or eliminate the potential transmission, having your engineering controls, your workplace controls, your remote work plans, having all that into a strategy, and then having documentation to prove that. And every call that I've been on is really about maintaining documentation. We've got 15,000 plus complaints to OSHA now from employees who are saying their employers are not abiding by COVID-19 mitigation requirements. OSHA is stepping up their inspections and their enforcement. And we've got the county health departments, local, state, fed requirements. There's a lot of eyeballs on employers now on what they're doing. From a regulator standpoint, not to mention the employees who are policing this now. So really important to communicate your strategy with your employees, have training documentation on how to don and doff PPE, have documentation on your disinfection procedures, your trainings, your exposure control plan. The more documentation you have, the more you can prove that it's less likely for this employee to get COVID-19 at my facility than socializing with their friends, right? And that's your affirmative defense, and unfortunately as employers, a lot of times we're guilty and have to prove our innocence. And it's really important that we have the documentation to support that. That way, if there is a COVID-19 claim, although if it is compensable, it is accepted by the carrier, it doesn't have an impact on the employer's XMOD, which is a good thing for employers. But we still have to deal with the infection and the potential contamination of our facility and the potential contamination or infection of other employees. So there's a whole decision tree that has to take place after that.
Yeah, I think that's really important and helpful to know that the XMOD won't be impacted by that, but there's still costs certainly associated with it. That executive order is supposed to expire on July 5th, I believe.
Yes, we believe it'll extend. Correct.
Yeah. So what are the probability that will be extended?
Probably pretty great. It's hard to say because, again, as we get smarter about this whole virus, things seem to evolve. We've developed these comprehensive plans for employers, and then I tell them, well, we'll probably throw that in the can and we'll revisit this next week when the new regulations come out. So we have to be really flexible and adaptable. We do believe it will extend. I know the vendor insurance team is really active in the Capital Family Business Region Center. We did a co-hosted webinar on the COVID-19 compensability claims. So I believe they have that on their website. If not, we're going to be hosting it on our website. So happy to share that information as well. Abe Japon in our office put together the presentation that really works through what is a rebuttable presumption, what are the expectations employers need to adhere to, what are the requirements, and then what are the timelines for ongoing requirements just with this compensability aspect.
That's great. Well, that's really generous, and certainly when I was starting to bring my team back, we went to your website and used part of what you have to supplement our injury illness prevention program. So we were covering everything to make sure,
Good.
even in an office setting, that we were ready to go. So thank you for that.
Good.
Let's move along. Sherry Smiley is the Chief Talent Officer at Assemi Group. And I was not familiar with Assemi Group. And boy, once I started researching, this is a family-owned business down in the Central Valley. Sherry, this is an impressive group. You have investments in so many industries. Would you just share a bit about what Assemi does and your role there when you're not on the Bay Bridge?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I don't have a website that you can download any of my proprietary work that I've been doing in this crazy COVID time. Assemi Group is a family wealth management company. It's a 45-year-old family-run business. It started with Granville Homes, building single-family residence and custom homes. They have expanded to single-family residential, multifamily, commercial division. We do farming all across the valley. We probably are one of the largest tree nuts, pistachio, and almonds. We also do citrus and grapes and blueberries. So we're rolling into a really busy season. We also have an aviation division. We have scholastic education. We've been building out a pharmacy school. It's complete. They had just got accredited last year, and I think their second classes have graduated. Another campus that we're completing now for osteopath, for medical endeavors. We do have a social media news company called GV Wire right in the middle of our production company for home building. And we also have More, which is our non-profit that does work locally in Manteca and also internationally in Afghanistan. I don't have my fingers in all that stuff. I'd be crazier than I am now. So there's a lot going on here. We have about 300 employees, and this team did not lay off anybody.
Interesting.
How did I do that?
Yeah, so talk to us about how you did that.
Well, I am lucky enough to have the CEO on the board of Fresno Community Hospital. So he's the chairman of the board. And he got wind end of December that something big was coming. So I started a small committee ramping up our sanitization requirements for the building, all of the buildings. We didn't get to the mask and the gloves. We were at hourly wipe downs of highly touched areas. But then when it became a little more known that it was COVID and we might have to do layoffs, I jumped in and did work share programs for every one of the entities, because I knew that some could work from home and maybe some couldn't. They might not be able to do full-time work. They could do part-time work. I got that all ramped. I'd never walked that path before. I didn't do it perfect the first time. The lady at EDD was kind enough to call me and say, yeah, I don't need 100%. I just need 60%. So we worked through that. Honestly, I got 50 boxes of documents from EDD. We didn't get to talk about this much, but there is so much paper that they sent me. I thought, what a waste of money. Anyway, we won't go down that because I didn't have to use the work share program that I had strategically put in place. We then formed a committee of managers and executives to hash through a 69-page document from our friends at Fisher & Phillips, another labor law firm. And they did a good job. Heads up, this is where it's going. This is what you want to do, what you need to look at. So we set our team up in phases. Phase 1, come back. Phase 2, come back. Phase 3, come back. We had phase 1, and all of our entities were essential businesses. So we didn't have to close down, but we did, except for the farming folks. They kept rolling because the trees won't wait. And the trees don't have to wear masks. So the farming entity kept going. The construction side, we shut the production guys down for about 8 days. but then we got them back because we figured out ways we could do that. Our sales offices, where the model homes were, shut those down for just a few days until we started using Zoom and doing by appointment only. They are back in the office, but they are only by appointment only. Also, we did the plexiglass thing. We looked at all the facility. Where do we need to put dividers? Where is it that we cannot? I just heard that Canada calls it physical distancing. We're calling it social distancing. So I kind of like physical distancing better because we all still need to be social. Anyway, we're dropping plexiglass, the front office, the cubicles that don't have high enough walls. We've done that path. I have one entity that's really separate. So they got legal counsel and they actually went very far to the black and white. They assigned a safety PPP officer who will scan and temperature check each employee every day, maintain those records, and have people leave and refuse to be there if they do not meet the temperature check. I think they did a pre-entry training where they all had to sit in a training before they could come back to work. What we did, because of our production team, because of our news media arm, we created a video. And so that video was specific to our buildings, donning and doffing, sanitation, how we're doing it, what we're doing. And then we got that out to all of our employees that were working remotely to build confidence that we are on top of it. This is what we're doing. We're getting ready for all of you to come back. So phase one basically was our doers, the people that needed to be here that couldn't work from home, they came back. The second phase, and honestly, the second phase was voluntary. Who's ready to come back? Whose kids are driving them crazy? Who can't get stuff done at home? So we looked at how many of those people wanted to come back, and if they could physically distance, we allowed that. Right now, we're wrapping up phase 3. Next week should be either you're coming back or you're more productive at home, working productively from home, and your manager has approved this. I only have about 20% of the 300 people that are saying, hey, can I do 2 days in the office and 3 days from home? Because this is really work-life balance for me and I'm efficient. And we're allowing that flexibility. I kind of went on a tangent and covered a lot of stuff.
You did. So are there any things you did for vendors or visitors, customers in your facilities to support that social distancing?
Yes, our team, the FedEx guy and the UPS guy and the regular visitors, they exchanged texts and they exchanged phone numbers. And they said, if you want to deliver, you got to talk to me first, because our office is on lockdown perimeter and there's only key fob access for employees. And we restrict anything that comes into the office. It has to be sanitized before it comes in. So we did that with our regular vendors, and then we restricted visitors, no visitors. And that's still the case. If we are going to visit internally, we prefer they do it on Zoom. We've pulled conference room chairs. I don't believe they know what physical distancing is, or I didn't measure out 6 feet. So in our large conference room, there are only 4 chairs. In our smaller conference rooms, there's only 2 chairs. So we kind of took that bull by the horn. And we also had a huge challenge in our accounting departments. We weren't paperless for AP. And although I know that the CEOs were praying and hoping for this years ago, the staff had to turn it around in 30 to 40 days to get that done. And now they're pretty close to having really good paperless processes that are working. Not perfect, a lot of long hours, a lot of frustrated employees, probably more frustrated managers than employees, but finally getting the AP role into a digital process, I think, was our biggest challenge. But the vendors all got emails. If you want to get paid, don't mail us. Scan and send it to this address. So they worked through that little hurdle too.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you're really nimble down there and certainly generous and able to work in so many industries and keep all these balls in the air. It's amazing. I'm going to stay on time here and move to our attorney. Liz Beth, who I think if you know her more than 2 minutes, she would be Beth West. Beth West is one of Northern California's most prolific, awarded, sought-after employment attorneys. She's a shareholder at Weintraub Tobin. And Beth is muy busy. She agreed to join us today. Beth, I know you've already written one book, but I'm pretty sure you could write another book just about the last quarter. So would you share a little bit about your background and your practice and where you're spending your time these days? Beth, you're...
I'm so glad I'm really live. Thank
are.
you so much for the invitation. Had a little technical difficulty as we started. So yes, I am a shareholder at Weintraub Tobin. I lead and the chair of the Labor and Employment Department, and we're a management side employment practice where we help employers with all aspects of their employment relationship with their employees. I've been doing it for over 20 years. And we thought that employment law was hard enough before COVID-19 pandemic, but we all learned around March 18th how adaptable and resilient we are, and it's gotten even tougher to be an employer in California. So that's what I do. You're right, I've been very, very busy. It's probably one of the most surreal times of my practice over the last 20 plus years.
So, you know, we opened up for questions as people were registering, and one of the questions that came up a lot, so I'll just ask this of you early on, is that when employers are ready to bring employees back on site, what kind of health screening can they do to ensure they have a safe and healthy work team there? And you know all the questions in terms of whether we're doing temperature checks or testing or whatever. So tell us what I can get away with.
Well, that's a great question, and one that people are very concerned about, because prior to this pandemic, for the most part, we were very restricted in our ability to do what the EEOC refers to as medical screening or medical exams. They had to be supported by legitimate business necessity, safety issues, and so forth. But since the CDC and the World Health Organization announced COVID-19 as a pandemic, we do have guidance on both the federal and state level from the EEOC and California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing, has both given us guidance that said we can do certain screening when we're bringing our employees back for the sole purpose of addressing potential symptoms of COVID-19. But if we do that, we have to be very careful. As one of the ones that you just mentioned, Kim, and that a lot of employers are grappling with whether they're going to implement this, and I think it really depends on the industry and the risk assessment, as Anthony was evaluating by industry, is taking temperatures. And so both the EEOC and DFEH said yes, as a screening mechanism, you can require that employees have their temperatures taken before they enter the work site. If you do that, however, a number of laws can be implicated that you need to be aware of, and then also some practical implications as well. Who's going to do the temperature check? Is that person properly trained? Is that person properly protected themselves with appropriate PPE and so forth? And then just because we're in a pandemic, we're not losing our privacy rights. So we still have to make sure we're protecting our employees' privacy rights under various federal and state laws. And one thing to be very mindful of, I don't know that a lot of people are talking about this, but if you are going to implement a temperature screen and you plan to record and store the data, that is biometric information of your employees. And under California Consumer Privacy Rights Act, we have certain obligations if we are storing personal information that belongs to our employees, which includes biometrics. So there's options here. You could do the temperature check and do no permanent recording or storage of the information, but merely make it a live-time data collection, so that if somebody does have a temperature of 100.4, which is what the CDC has set the temperature concern at, then you merely tell that person not to come to work, see their healthcare provider, do the proper quarantining and so forth, but you're not actually recording the data for later purposes. So with that said, that is just one of the various screenings. There are some less intrusive screenings that employers can implement, which are, I've seen clients of mine do it, and as a matter of fact, I'm in-house counsel for my firm, and we've done it in our protocol and reentry plan, is a self-screening stop notice that's posted at every entrance. And before anybody is allowed to enter, you've probably seen this at grocery stores and so forth, you have to answer certain questions. Have you had a temperature in the last 3 days of 100.4, and all these various questions. And if you answer yes to any of those, you're not allowed to enter our facility or our office. Please call a certain number. We're happy to assist you remotely and so forth. So absolutely, because we're in a public health crisis, employers can implement screening. If they're going to implement the ones that are pretty intrusive, like temperature, even though we can do it now without touching someone, just be mindful of certain privacy and notice obligations.
All right, thank you. And, you know, I've heard stories about the temperature checks and somebody's standing outside and it's hot outside and their temperature peaks, and then they go in the lobby and, you know, it drops 3 points. So I'm
exactly
temperature checks here, but some people feel the need to do that. So, we have a lot of questions about, now that we're bringing people back, employees who aren't ready, don't want to, whatever, come back. So Beth, let me give you some scenarios. This would be like Jeopardy. Okay, so let me give you some, except I won't give you the answer. I give you the question, you give me the opposite Jeopardy.
Okay.
Okay, so furloughed employee says he just doesn't want to return to work right now because he's fearful of being exposed to coronavirus. And this is what we would call an anxious employee. I don't have it, don't know anybody who has it, but I'm just scared. So what options does the employer have when they have a job waiting for this person?
That actually is really common. It is probably one of the most common things that clients are dealing with right now as these phased-in reopening plans are happening and people are allowed to open their businesses in some modified capacity. They have employees who are saying, well, wait a minute, the virus is still out there and I'm afraid of it. And if it's a generalized anxiety of this virus, which I think it's fair to say most of us probably have, then that alone is not going to protect them from refusing to come back to work. But I really caution employers to be very, very careful in these situations. You have to take each of these incidences on an individualized basis. You have to do some active listening so that you make sure you understand really the context behind that fear. Because if it is a generalized anxiety, yet there isn't an underlying medical condition that the employee has, there isn't an underlying medical condition of a family member or someone in their household, it's just a fear, then if we've done everything that the state orders and local orders require in our reentry protocols and CDC and OSHA require, as Anthony discussed, so that we've got protections in place, then the expectation is that employee needs to come back to work. That's acceptable work. And the only time an employee can refuse to come to work absent any other protection is if there's an imminent danger to their health and safety. That's what OSHA statutes say. They said that before this pandemic. And so we have to analyze this on an individualized basis to make sure we can say there is no imminent danger. At least we've done all reasonable steps we're required to, that we're recommended to do, and so we've got a safe work environment for you. Please come back to work.
Please. So, okay, let's talk
about— And I will tell you, well, I was just going to say, Kim, one other thing is that if we're satisfied that we do have all the information and it is just a generalized anxiety, that person will likely lose their eligibility for unemployment as well if they refuse to come back to work. So that's
Good,
important
yeah.
to make sure that it's that discussion.
I suspect it might be up to 2 years before the EDD catches up with that, but there will be penalties to pay for somebody who's been collecting unemployment and turned down a legitimate job offer. So let's talk about the employee who says, you know, Beth, I'd really like to come back, but I'm actually making more money on unemployment. And that extra $600 a week is really nice. So call me in August when that's up. What's the employer's option on that?
Yeah, so did you ever think you were going to hear that? I mean, we all know that unemployment, just like workers' comp and SCI, are partial wage replacements. They're safety nets. They were never intended to really pay somebody their full wage, let alone more than they are paid when they are working. So this was, I hope, an unintended consequence when the CARES Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by the President, that when they provided for the supplemental unemployment payment of $600 a week on top of state unemployment benefits, some employees were actually making more money than they would if they were working their regular job at their regular rate of pay. And so I've had a number of clients who said, Beth, I'm allowed, the orders are lifting, I'm bringing my people back, and I really need them to come back because I need to get my loan forgiven under the PPP loan. And employees are refusing because they said, no, I'm making more money on unemployment. So we do have some guidance now from the DOL that has made very clear that if the sole reason for not coming back to work, again, we should do active listening, make sure we understand the context with this employee, but if it's solely because they're making more money, that is unemployment insurance fraud. And employees should make clear to the employee in a written documentation that I'm understanding that you are rejecting your offer to come back to work at your full capacity, full wages, I just want you to know this is probably going to make you ineligible for unemployment, and then you need to notify the EDD and let the EDD know that the employee has rejected work on that basis. We understand that the DOL has made very clear to state employment development departments that they expect them to follow up on these and actually do the appropriate investigations of any overpayment and return or, recoup any overpayment based on fraud.
Yeah, we're advising our clients that if you make a job offer for somebody to return to work, that you put it in writing and you include in that, if you turn this offer down, you may not be eligible for unemployment. And then when they do turn it down, we send them another letter that says, we understand you've turned this down. Please remember that this may make you ineligible, in part because of the PPP loan forgiveness. So we want to make sure that we can prove that. Yeah, it was nice to
the
have
PPP. The SBA expects you to have the offer in writing and any documentation of their rejection, and then current SBA rules that just came out not quite a week ago are now placing an affirmative duty on the employees to contact the EDD also when that happens.
Okay, good to know. Beth, are there COVID-related legal challenges you anticipate we'll see in the next few months related to this, and if so, how can employers shore up to minimize those risks?
Yeah, I mean, Anthony touched on a lot of the health and safety issues and the risks of workers' comp claims if somebody contracts COVID-19 while working out of the house, at least during the period of this executive order, and as he anticipates, and I think he's probably correct, that may be extended. We also probably will likely see some retaliation and whistleblower uptick, I think, because we now have heightened obligations as employers to the health and safety. I mean, we've always had health and safety obligations to our employees, but we have heightened obligations, all caused by a pandemic that for most of us, we've never had to live through like this. And I anticipate that if employees exercise their rights when they think maybe social distancing and protocols are not being complied with, if they suffer some sort of adverse action or perceived adverse action by a supervisor, we may be finding ourselves in retaliation and whistleblower complaints. So that is something that we're keeping an eye on. The other thing I think is really important to not lose sight of is that as we do re-enter the workforce and get back to work in some modified capacity, we do have additional leave entitlements that are still available to employees that were not available to employees when this whole thing started, right? The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, will be in effect through December 31st of this year. And so don't forget that there may be employees who you are ready to bring back to work who may have some COVID-related contingency, maybe not a health issue, but a child care and school issue that may entitle them to some leave benefit. And if you don't provide it, you may be violating that law as well. So those are some of the kind of liability risks that we anticipate as we start to re-enter the work site.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm going to open this up to Stella. Are there questions from our audience that perhaps we can have our panelists? Hi there.
Hi there. Great content, everyone. Thank you so much. So we do have a couple of questions, and the first one is related to volunteers. There's volunteers that go into other nonprofits to do volunteer activities. Are there any programs or protocols that you would suggest for managing volunteers on sites?
Beth,
I work with everybody.
I work with a large nonprofit, about 1,500 employees. They have challenges. I'll give their example and I'll try to correlate this. They have staff that goes into homes to provide services for special needs folks. One of the challenges that they've seen, especially in the Bay Area during this shelter in place, is typically that home might have 3 or 4 people in the home, but now we're seeing multi-generations in a home that weren't there before. So now there's 10 to 14 people in that house. And the concern is the staff member is going into this home, they're required to wear their PPE. They might be in the home for 4 hours. Are they requiring the family members to wear PPE? And so they've really started documentation and sending out letters and memos to these clients saying, these are our guidelines. If our staff member doesn't feel comfortable coming into your home because the appropriate PPE isn't being provided or wearing or social distancing isn't practiced, we're going to be pulling them, or we've given them the authority to leave the site. Now, again, as I mentioned, there's not really a one size fits all. I really think this OSHA pyramid is actually supported, or a really good tool or exercise to use, is to identify the very high to low risk categories, identify what are the potential risks associated with each one of those categories, and then define what the PPE or what your workplace practices are. From a nonprofit, like reemployability takes injured employees and puts them into nonprofits to do work for modified duty to provide accommodation during their work restrictions. So one thing that we've looked at is making sure that those nonprofits have their own exposure control plan, are providing that to us in writing, we're reviewing it, and then also training those employees on here's what you can expect from a social distancing, PPE, engineering controls standpoint when you actually go to that facility. So there's really got to be open lines of communication. There's got to be some practices in place. Those need to be shared. And most importantly, the employees need to be trained on what the expectations are. If I can give one more example, and this just happened to me. I went to a grocery store and I got to the front, and as I'm in line, they've got tents out front. They've got tape that measures 6 feet distances. So I wait in line. I've got my mask on. I've got my gloves. I'm ready to go in. I get to the front. There's a worker there who's wearing his PPE, and he's letting people go in one at a time as he's getting signaled from someone at the back door saying somebody's left, somebody else can go in. So they're controlling the capacity. So I go in there and I go right to my aisle where I know the stuff is I want to get. And as I'm walking down the aisle, I'm getting all these dirty looks from people that are walking towards me. And at that point, I realized that they had put red tape with arrows pointing for one directional traffic to go down these aisles. And here I am, a safety guy, breaking the law. So I thought these are great engineering controls and worksite controls, but they failed on the training. And I think that that's one really important aspect that a lot of employers might miss is you're developing all these great procedures. Don't expect employees to know them, adhere to them. You've got to train them, and then you've got to have the documentation to prove that you've done it.
All right, Beth, do you have any? Beth, do you have any comments about volunteers?
Well, you know, it's hard with volunteers because they are protected similarly to employees under some statutes, right? We protect our volunteers against harassment in the workplace. And if you're putting volunteers into your work environment, the expectation is that your health and safety obligations should also be protecting them. So I think if you're utilizing volunteers, you should be relying on, or actually complying with the safety protocols required in the applicable order that applies to your workplace, and all of the obligations under OSHA and recommendations by CDC, just as if those individuals were employees.
Okay. Stella, any other questions?
So this one pretty much piggybacks on the same question, but what about when employees stop adhering to the rules of social distancing, or customers in retail environments stop adhering to the social distancing? They're getting too close to staff, or staff are getting too close to each other. Are there any best practices around how that's mitigated?
Katina, you're nodding your head.
Well, since we've been at this since the very, very beginning, I think people's guard has dropped a little bit. And one of the things that I continue to tell people is now people are getting out more. Our exposure is actually higher. People are coming out in greater groves than they were before. And all you can do all I do is walk around and just go mask, mask, mask. I've had to send a couple people home. I just remind them. I've given some written warnings. Customers, I kind of have taught my people to do a dance. Even with the plexiglass, they move back when the customer moves forward, they move forward when the customer moves back. We wipe everything down, and we do it every time. And I told my employees, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable to tell people, could you please step back? Could you please, whatever it is. I have to tell people to take their bare feet off my furniture. I mean, he's like, what? I took my shoes off. I went, yeah, but I think that's worse. I honestly think that's worse. But anyway, I mean, and that's uncomfortable to tell a grown person, take your feet off my public chairs, please. But you have to do it because other people are walking around going, ooh, that's disgusting. So it just, unfortunately, we've been put in a position, mom always told us, be polite, don't, make people feel awkward, but you have to do it, and you do it politely. And if you have to, you explain, and I continue to explain to my people, tell me what it looks like if you get sick. Where do I stop sending people home? You've basically put this department out of business. And so they get it. But I have a guy that just keeps going, I understand. I said, well, you know what? Why don't you go home for the rest of the day, and then maybe there'll be action taken. I understand you understand, but you're not complying. So sometimes there has to be a little, tough love, so to speak. I don't know. It's tough. It's really, really hard for these people because now as it gets warmer, I've got outdoor people, indoor people, and you just have to do their best, and they're overworked at this point because we're still a little understaffed. So, I mean, I feel horrible, but it has to be done because I have to think of the mass,
Well, and I think it's okay to, if you have policy that says we'll have social distancing, you'll wear a mask, whatever, and you're applying that consistently, I think it's okay to write people up, to discipline them, to send them home. I mean, Sherry, is that something that you would be comfortable to do?
I was at a processing plant yesterday in Terravella, and we had an announcement of change of ownership. So we brought taco trucks, and they don't really know me yet. And I did walk up to people and say, do you have a mask? Do you need one? And social distancing or physical distancing in that arena was really tough. I don't really think we complied. But I did make them wear the mask. So it is tough. I haven't written anybody up yet, but we're not full force back in the work spot. I did read an article today about heat and mask and how the masks are restrictive of air, and that we really have to monitor more breaks, flexibility, time to take the mask down more frequently, especially you're out in the field, folks. So we're kind of addressing the new, the mask we need are now causing another problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beth, did you have a comment?
I do, only because this is a new world, and so I think kind of the delicate approach that Katina and Sherry just mentioned is probably the right starting point to kind of remind people these are new protocols and they don't feel natural. But I do think it's important, if you have a serial violator or somebody who's just really stubbing their nose at policy, I agree with Kim, you have to take action, and you have to show that you've taken that action, because Anthony and his outfit can do wonderful things and get ICPs and all kinds of plans and programs in place for employers. But when OSHA comes and cites you, or you get, sued for some sort of violation in the workplace, your policies are only as good as they're implemented and enforced. And so you need to enforce them. You need to document your enforcement.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's 3 o'clock, so out of respect for your time, I just want to thank this mighty panel. Katina, Anthony, Sherry, and Beth, thank you so much. Stella, I will turn this back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So thank everybody for being here and for participating in the webinar. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you so much. We will have this, we have had this recorded, and we will have it on the website by the end of the day today, and expect an email from me later this afternoon with a link that'll get you to more information. Next week, on June the 10th, we're going to have a webinar called Execution After Crisis, and shining a light on business risk and opportunities through a global pandemic. And that's going to be presented by Dr. Michael Swanson. He's the Chief Food and Agricultural Economist with Wells Fargo Bank. So stay tuned, and I look forward to presenting more information. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.
Thank you.